I have heard it said that fate does not punish the cruel. That the wicked sleep soundly, marry well, and die old. For most of my life, I believed that. Because I watched it happen. The night Alpha Ryan Hazelton stood before 10,000 gathered wolves and looked me in the eye, 7 years' worth of loyalty standing between us like a living thing, and said those words, I did not fall apart. I did not scream. I did not beg. He said, Kathryn Hendry does not carry the blood required to stand beside me as Luna. Her lineage is impure. The Blackthorn Pack deserves better. The crowd was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then they applauded. And I walked. Through the festival grounds, past the great fire columns, past every face that had smiled at me that morning and now watched me go. I kept my chin level. I kept my shoulders straight. I walked the way a woman walks when she has decided that her pain belongs to no one else. But something happened the moment I crossed into the ancient border forest. The stone wolves lining the old road began to glow. One. Then another. Then all of them, their carved eyes burning silver gold in the dark, their mouths parted as though they were finally breathing again after centuries of waiting. I stopped walking. My heart stopped with me. And from somewhere deep inside the tree line, a voice said, She is finally awake. I did not know that voice. But the forest did. The trees leaned toward the sound of it like old friends. I turned. He was tall enough to block the moon. His hair fell dark past his jaw. A scar ran across the left side of his face, clean and deliberate as a signature. His eyes caught the light from the glowing statues and held it, silver, almost liquid, completely still. He was not looking at me the way men look at women they find interesting. He was looking at me the way someone looks at a thing they have been searching for across a very long distance. He said nothing else. Just watched. Just wait. And somewhere at the back of my mind, underneath the grief and the exhaustion and the anger that I had refused to feel yet, something old and wordless stirred. As if it recognized him too. Chapter 1, The Woman Who Built a King. There are facts about me that the Blackthorn Pack never cared to learn. I arrived 7 years ago with 3 things, a second-hand travel bag, an old letter of introduction from a pack elder who had since died, and the kind of quiet determination that comes from having nothing left to lose. I was 16. I did not ask for comfort. I asked for work. They gave me the training grounds at dawn. Every morning for 6 months, I cleaned weapons, organized combat drills, and fixed whatever the night patrol had broken. I learned the terrain better than the warriors who had lived there for decades. I learned the names of every elder, every family, every supply route. I made myself necessary before anyone had decided whether they liked me. Because that was the only power I had, usefulness. Ryan Hazelton noticed me in my 2nd year. Not the way men notice women in stories. He noticed me the way a man notices someone who can be useful. He was 20 at the time, newly elevated to Alpha after his father's sudden illness, and the pack was fractured and uncertain. He needed someone who understood logistics, alliances, and the precise language of wolf politics without needing it explained twice. I was that person. Over the years that followed, I helped negotiate 3 border treaties. I reorganized the warrior rotation system so rest cycles improved and injury rates dropped by half. I accompanied Ryan to every major council meeting, standing just behind his left shoulder, feeding him information in a low voice whenever a conversation grew complicated. The other alphas respected him for his instincts. His instincts were often mine. I never said that aloud. It would not have helped anything. But alongside all of it, something else grew. Quietly, the way things grow when they are not tended, when they are fed only by proximity and the occasional evening where Ryan looked at me longer than necessary and then looked away. I fell in love with him. Slowly, the way water shapes stone. Not all at once, but over time, in layers, until the feeling was too deep to excavate without taking everything else with it. I never told him directly. Not in words. I showed him the way I showed everything. Through loyalty, through precision, through always being exactly where he needed me. I believed that would be enough. I believed, in the private place where I kept my most foolish thoughts, that when it came time for him to choose a Luna, he would see what was already right in front of him. I was, as it turned out, catastrophically wrong about that. But there is something I need to tell you about the period just before the Moonfire Festival, before the night everything shattered. There had been odd moments for weeks. An old pack elder, a woman with white hair and eyes clouded by age, had grabbed my wrist one morning in the market. She held it with surprising strength, staring at my hand, then looked up at my face and whispered, "Child, do you know what you carry?" I had gently removed my wrist and assumed she was confused. She died 3 days later, and I was left with her words and nothing to attach them to. I also noticed that wild wolves, the ones that lived in the forest outside the pack borders, the ones that never came near humans, had begun appearing at the tree line whenever I walked past. Just watching. Sitting very still, their heads low in a posture that looked, impossibly, like deference. I told no one. I filed it away under things I could not explain and kept moving, because there was always work to do. The Moonfire Festival was 3 days away. Ryan had told me to manage the ceremony arrangements. He had told me nothing else. That should have been the warning. His inner circle had noticed Bonnie Finn for months before I did. She was beautiful in a way that required no description, the way sunlight requires no argument. Golden hair, an easy smile, a laugh that came often and landed softly. She came from one of the oldest lineages in the Western packs. Bloodline reaching back 6 generations without interruption, every ancestor documented and verified, every name engraved in the sacred registry. Pure, by every measure the pack used. She was also kind to me, which I found confusing. She always smiled when we passed in the corridors. She asked genuine questions about my work. Once, when I was running late to a council briefing with an armload of maps, she held the door open without being asked. I did not know then what I know now. That her kindness was not deception. She was simply a person who had been handed a terrible role and had not yet chosen whether to refuse it. On the morning of the festival, I dressed in the gray and silver of the Blackthorn Pack and went to oversee the final preparations. Ryan was already on the main platform. He did not look at me when I arrived. I told myself that was fine. He was nervous. He had reasons to be distracted. I told myself a great many things that morning that I will not repeat, because they were the words of a woman trying to keep herself from knowing something she already knew. Chapter 2, The Public Rejection. The Moonfire Festival was the largest gathering in the Blackthorn Pack's calendar. 10,000 wolves came from every affiliated territory. They filled the ceremonial valley from one ridge to the other, standing in their finest clothes, faces lit by the great fire columns that lined the central path. The moon hung low and full, swollen with light, spreading a silver wash across everything it touched. It was the kind of night that felt like it had been built for a story. It was. Only not the one I had been writing. Ryan walked the central path first, alone, the way tradition demanded. He wore the black alpha coat I had helped select 2 weeks prior, structured shoulders, gold trim along the collar, the blackthorn wolf crest on his chest. He was devastatingly handsome and he knew it. His posture was the posture of a man who had arrived exactly where he always intended to be. The crowd parted for him with the natural ease of people who have long accepted a certain order. He reached the ceremony platform and turned to face the valley. His voice, amplified by the ancient acoustics of the stone bowl, carried to every edge of the crowd. Blackthorn Pack. Tonight, before the moon and before every witness gathered here, I fulfill my duty as Alpha. I name my Luna. I seal the future of this pack. The crowd murmured with anticipation. I stood at the edge of the platform, a few steps behind where the ceremony officials were arranged. I had helped plan the seating. I had drafted the ceremonial script. I had made sure the fire columns would be lit in the correct order at the correct time. I was, as I had always been, the person who made the thing work. Ryan looked at me then. And the look on his face was not cruel. It was something worse than cruelty. It was a resolution. The expression of a man who has already made peace with something and has come only to say it out loud. There is a woman who has served this pack faithfully. Kathryn Hendry. Her work has been valuable. Her loyalty has never been questioned. A brief pause. But Aluna must carry more than loyalty. She must carry blood. And Kathryn's bloodline is not sufficient for the role. It carries impurity that cannot be overlooked. I cannot in good conscience tie the future of the Blackthorn Pack to a lineage that does not meet our standard. 10,000 wolves were completely still. Then the murmuring began. I did not hear most of it. There is something that happens to the body when it absorbs a blow it was not prepared for. The sound dims. The world narrows to a small precise circle of focus, Ryan's face, the fire columns, the exact distance from where I stood to the exit path. I remember the elders nodding. I remember Bonnie Finn stepping forward from the crowd, dressed in white and gold, her expression controlled and unreadable. I remember the applause starting from the back and moving forward like a wave. I remember thinking, I helped write this ceremony. Bonnie looked at me once, just before Ryan drew her forward. Her eyes were not triumphant. They held something that looked almost like an apology. I did not understand it then. I turned and walked away. No one stopped me. No one called after me. No one came. I walked past the fire columns, past the watching crowd, through the outer boundary of the festival grounds, and kept going until the sound of music behind me was small enough to ignore. I walked until I reached the ancient border forest. And that was when the stone wolves began to glow. Chapter 3, The Road of Stone Wolves. The old road was not on any current map. I had only found it 2 years earlier, while surveying border terrain after a winter flood shifted the usual paths. It cut through the deepest section of the border forest, lined on both sides by stone wolf statues so old their carvings had been worn soft by rain. Some stood upright, some kneeled. All of them faced inward, as if guarding something that passed between them. I had always felt something when I walked that road. A low pressure behind the sternum, like the moment before thunder, when the air is charged and waiting. I had assumed it was the isolation. I was wrong. The first statue began to glow when I was 50 steps onto the road. A faint pulse, silver gold, starting in its carved eyes and spreading through the stone like warmth spreading through cold hands. I stopped and stared at it. Then the next statue lit. Then the next. Down the entire length of the road, every ancient carved wolf waking up in sequence, their eyes opening with light, their stone bodies radiating something that was not quite heat but felt like presence. I stood very still. My wolf, the part of me that lived in the space beneath language, went completely quiet in the way it went quiet only when something extraordinary was near. Movement in the trees. He stepped onto the road 30 feet ahead of me. He was enormous in the way that powerful things are enormous, not just height, not just build, but the weight of something old and undeniable that sat in the air around him. Black armor, worn and edged in silver. Dark hair past his jaw. The scar along his left cheek, pale as moonlight against his skin. Silver eyes. Completely still. He looked at me the way I have described, and the forest leaned toward him. Then he spoke again, directly this time. I know you have questions. I have answers. But not here, and not tonight. Come with me. I should have refused. A rational woman, standing in a glowing ancient road after being publicly humiliated in front of 10,000 people, does not walk into a forest with a stranger who appeared without warning. Who are you? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of hesitation. The quiet of a man choosing how much to say. My name is Cody Walker. And if I told you the rest right now, you wouldn't believe me. But those statues have not glowed in 23 years. They were waiting for you specifically. I think you know that's not nothing. I looked at the statues. They were still lit, every eye trained forward, as if watching to see what I would decide. I thought about the festival behind me. The applause. The elders nodded. Ryan's face. I thought about the old woman who had grabbed my wrist and asked if I knew what I carried. I thought about the wild wolves at the tree line. I picked up my travel bag. I walked toward Cody Walker. The stone wolves watched us go. Their light did not fade until we were deep inside the trees and the festival was entirely behind us. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. Chapter 4, The King Who Was Waiting. His territory was 3 hours north on foot. We did not speak much during the walk. He moved with the economy of someone who had spent years operating in places where excess movement was dangerous. I kept pace with him without difficulty. 7 years of early training grounds had made my endurance something I was quietly proud of, and he noticed, though he said nothing. His palace, if you could call it that, was built into the side of a mountain range I had never seen charted. It was not a place anyone had told me existed. The architecture was old, older than Blackthorn, older than any building I had ever entered. Stone columns covered in the same runic script as the statues on the forest road. Interior fires burning blue-white in iron cages. Corridors wide enough for something much larger than a man to pass through comfortably. It smelled like iron and cold air and something else underneath that I could not identify, something ancient and metallic, like very old blood. The people inside moved differently when they saw me. Not curiosity. Not suspicion. They stopped what they were doing and they bowed their heads. One after another, every person we passed, bowing as though they had been given a signal. I looked at Cody. Why are they doing that? Because they recognize you. The same way the statues did. The same way I did when I first heard your name 6 years ago. He led me to a set of rooms near the upper level, a fire already burning, a spread of food on the table, warm water for washing. The kind of preparation that spoke of advance notice, of someone who had expected this night. You expected me tonight. You knew what was going to happen at the festival. He did not deny it. I knew it was soon. I didn't know it would be tonight. But yes. I have had people watching. I set down my bag and turned to face him fully. Then tell me what you know. All of it. Cody looked at me for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair back from the table and sat, resting his arms on his knees, his silver eyes level and direct. Your name is Kathryn Hendry. But that is not the name you were born with. And the people who know your real name have spent 23 years making sure you never found out. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the mountain stone like a voice too low to hear clearly. I sat down across from him and I said, "Start at the beginning." And he did. Chapter 5, The Forgotten Records. Cody did not tell me everything that night. He told me the outline of it, that there was a royal bloodline called the Moonfall dynasty, that it had vanished 23 years ago under circumstances that were never adequately explained, that the disappearance had reshaped every power structure in the Lycan world, and then he told me there was a scholar in his palace who would show me the actual proof. His name was Eloy Freeman. He was 60, thin in the way of someone who had spent decades sitting still and forgetting to eat, with silver hair that moved like it was conducting its own separate thoughts. He kept his archives in a series of rooms on the lower level that smelled of parchment and cedar oil, every wall lined floor to ceiling with documents so old some of them had been sealed behind glass. He was waiting for me when Cody brought me down. He looked at my face for a long time, the way the elder at the market had, and then he sat down abruptly, as if his legs had decided the moment required it. There she is. After all this time. He did not waste time after that. He moved through his archives with the efficiency of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his imagination so many times he could do it with his eyes closed. He showed me the original Moonfall Dynasty records. Centuries of royal lineage documentation, names and bloodline markers and prophecy texts, all cross-referenced and annotated in a dozen hands spanning generations. He showed me the records of the dynasty's last verified ruling family. He showed me the record that ended abruptly 23 years ago, mid-sentence, as if whoever was writing it had been interrupted and never returned. Then he showed me the erased section. It was a document from a secondary archive. One that had been copied from an original, and the copyist had made a small error. They had included 2 lines that the original had apparently been altered to remove. 2 lines referring to a child, a daughter, who had been taken from the capital the night the dynasty fell, smuggled out under a false name, placed with a distant border family. Placed to survive. Placed to be forgotten. The name given to that child was Kathryn. I sat with that for a long time. Eloy waited. Cody, standing in the doorway, waited. Then I asked the question I had to ask. Who erased it? Who took those 2 lines out of the original record? Eloy looked at Cody. Cody looked at me. That's what we need to find out next. And it's not going to be a comfortable answer. Over the following days, the picture assembled itself piece by piece. A warrior named Marisol joined the investigation, one of Cody's most trusted soldiers, a woman with dark skin and a Crimson Guard uniform and the kind of focused competence that made you feel steadier just being in the same room as her. She had spent the last 2 years quietly gathering evidence in the Eastern Pack territories, tracing the erasure backward through administrative records and council minutes and the private correspondence of dead men. What she had found was this. The Moonfall dynasty had not simply collapsed. It had been dismantled. Deliberately, by a coalition of 7 ruling families who stood to lose their positions if the dynasty survived. They had orchestrated the fall, divided the power between themselves, and then erased the evidence of what they had done, including the evidence that an heir existed. Not all of them had known there was a child. But some had. And those families had kept the secret through every generation since, passing it down like a terrible inheritance. The Hazelton family is in the documents. Ryan's grandfather was part of the original coalition. His father maintained the silence. Ryan himself. I don't know yet whether he knew about you specifically. But he knew about the dynasty. He has known me for years. I thought about 7 years. 7 years of being useful, being loyal, being exactly what he needed. 7 years of a man who had known, at some level, in some form, what I was. What I carried. What I could cost him. And I understood then why the public rejection had been so precise. Not cruelty for its own sake. A surgical removal. Discredit her bloodline, send her away, make sure she never stops to ask the right questions. I sat with that understanding for a long time too. It burned differently than grief. Grief is soft and heavy. This was clean and sharp, and it changed the shape of everything. Chapter 6, The Blood Test. Cody requested the sacred bloodline ritual on the 4th day. It was not a ritual performed lightly, it required a moon priest, 2 elder witnesses, and a consecrated chamber. The last time it had been performed in this palace was 40 years ago, to verify the legitimacy of a disputed Alpha succession. The moon priestess, Ursula, traveled 2 days to get there, her silver robes immaculate despite the journey, the faint lunar markings on her skin glowing at the edges in a way that made you understand her position was not ceremonial. She examined me before the ritual began. Hands on my temples, eyes closed, breathing in the measured rhythm of someone listening to something below the threshold of normal sound. When she opened her eyes, she said nothing for a long moment. The blood remembers everything. Even what the mind has been made to forget. The ritual took place at midnight. I stood in the center of a stone circle inlaid with silver runes, my bare feet on the cold floor, a single flame burning in a bowl before me. Ursula moved around the circle with deliberate slowness, speaking in Old Lycan, her voice low and continuous. I had been told it would not hurt. It did not hurt. But when the bloodline recognition began, when whatever ancient mechanism was woven into those runes turned its attention to the blood moving through me, I felt it like a tide coming in, immense and unstoppable, pushing against something inside me that had been sealed shut for 23 years. The runes lit. Everyone. Simultaneously, without sequence, without the single-by-single progression of normal recognition. Ursula stopped moving. Eloy made a sound like a man who had just confirmed something he had not entirely dared to believe. Marisol said nothing. She had been a warrior long enough that her face was still when the moment demanded it. Cody, standing at the edge of the circle, looked at me with those silver eyes and said very quietly, "There it is." The light from the runes was silver gold, the same as the stone wolves on the road. It spread from the floor up through the air around me, warm and pervasive, like being inside a sunrise. Ursula read the result with the practiced gravity of someone who has witnessed many things and chooses her reactions carefully. She turned to Cody and then to me, and she said, "Moonfall bloodline, primary line, unbroken. This is the last true heir. There is no question and no interpretation. The blood is clear." I stood in the middle of all that light and thought about a pack saying I had grown up hearing at the edges of other people's conversations. Bloodline is the bone. Everything else is flesh. I thought, yes. They were right about that part, at least. They just had the wrong bones. Chapter 7, The Hidden Princess. After the ritual, Ursula led me to a chamber in the deepest level of the mountain palace. A room that had been sealed with 2 locks, one physical, one something else, some kind of blood recognition mechanism built into the stone of the door itself. The seal broke when I placed my hand on it without anyone asking me to. It simply recognized me and stepped aside. The room held portraits. Dozens of them, spanning centuries, arranged in chronological order along every wall. Moonfall dynasty rulers, men and women of various ages, all painted with the same quality of attention reserved for people who matter to history. I moved along the walls slowly. The faces were strangers to me. But something about the posture of them, the particular way many of them held themselves, chin level, expression contained, the quiet of people who carry things without advertising the weight, felt familiar in the way that mirrors are familiar. Ursula, standing in the doorway, said softly, "The last portrait. End of the right wall." I found it. A woman, perhaps 30 years old, painted against a background of moonlit stone. Dark hair, pale skin, silver-gray eyes. My eyes. My face, aged 10 years forward, wearing a crown with blue sapphires and a gold necklace shaped like a crescent moon. Below the portrait, a nameplate. Queen Serena of the Moonfall dynasty. Last ruling heir. Vanished. Year of the Dark Assembly. My mother. I stood in front of that portrait for a very long time. I thought about the name I had always been given, the blank spaces in what people told me about where I came from, the border family who had raised me until I was 12 and then quietly died in a fire that everyone called accidental, leaving me with nothing but the travel bag and the letter of introduction and the particular quality of loneliness that comes from having always been kept at a certain distance from the truth. I pressed my fingertips to the name plate on the portrait. I said nothing. There was nothing to say, not yet. Behind me, Cody walked in and stopped at a respectful distance. He had stayed outside until now. He spoke without being asked, his voice even and low. She hid you herself. Your mother. The night the coalition came. She chose the border family, put you in their care, stripped away every marker that would identify you, even suppressed your bloodline expression so it wouldn't show. That's why the statues were dormant. She locked it. She locked it to protect you. What happened to her? A pause. She survived the initial fall. She spent years trying to work her way back to you. She died 6 years ago, still searching. 6 years ago. 1 year before I arrived at the Blackthorn Pack. 1 year before, Ryan Hazelton had looked up and noticed a young woman who was, as it turned out, the heir to a dynasty capable of dismantling every throne that had been built on its ruins. I thought about his face at the festival. The resolution in it. I wondered for the first time whether he had known not just that I existed, but specifically who I was. I turned to Cody. Did he know? Ryan. Did he know about the portrait? About my mother? Cody met my eyes. That is what Josephine is about to tell us. Chapter 8, The Conspiracy. Josephine came with the night. She arrived at the mountain palace on a horse she had ridden hard, her traveling cloak covered in road dust, her dark eyes sharp and alert in a way that sleep deprivation could not blunt. She was a noble woman from the Southern Council families, old name, quiet power, the kind of woman who had spent 40 years in the rooms where decisions were made and had come to understand their mechanisms better than most of the men who sat at the tables. She had been Cody's contact inside the council for 7 years. She had been waiting for this moment longer than that. She sat across from me, folded her hands on the table, and began. Ryan Hazelton knew who you were. Not at the beginning, he found out in his 3rd year as Alpha, when he inherited his father's private archives. He discovered the family's role in the original coalition. He discovered the suppressed records. He discovered there was an heir. She paused and looked at me steadily. He hired people to find you. He found you before you ever found him. The room was very quiet. He hired me. I came to his pack because I needed work. I came on my own. You came because 3 pack recruiters in 3 different territories all happened to turn you away in the same week, leaving only one open invitation. His. I have the correspondence. It was arranged. I sat with that. 7 years rearranging themselves in my memory. Every small thing I had attributed to circumstance or luck or the natural shape of a working relationship, reframing itself against this new geometry. Marisol, who had been standing against the wall, spoke for the first time. He kept you close to monitor you. He needed to know if the bloodline suppression would hold. If your power would activate on its own. If you were a threat. But you were also genuinely useful to him. I think he told himself that if you stayed powerless, if the suppression held, he could keep you there indefinitely. Controlled proximity. Better than the alternative. And when it started showing signs of breaking through, he moved up the timeline. The festival was supposed to be a standard Luna announcement. He accelerated it. He needed you discredited and gone before whatever was building and you had the chance to surface. The public rejection was insurance. No pack would accept a Luna candidate who had been formally rejected on bloodline grounds. Even if new information emerged later, the social damage would be difficult to undo. I looked at the table. I thought about the word insurance. I thought about 7 years. The grief I had been holding very carefully since the festival, the thing I had not allowed to fully open because I could not afford to collapse in a stranger's palace while there was still so much to understand, shifted its shape. It did not leave. But it became something harder and more useful. It became clear. The second piece of the conspiracy came from Vance. Former royal investigator, rugged and weathered in the way of a man who had spent decades doing difficult work in cold places, his face carrying a network of old scars that each told their own story. He had found the council vote records. The 7 families who had dismantled the Moonfall dynasty had, in the 23 years since, built an entire governance structure on the foundation of its absence. The Grand Lunar Assembly, which convened every decade to confirm supreme leadership over all Pack kingdoms, was controlled by those families. Every Alpha seat, every Elder Council position, every major treaty, all of it ran through them. Ryan Hazelton was standing for supreme leadership at the upcoming assembly. It was scheduled for 11 days from now. If he takes that seat, the conspiracy becomes permanent. He will have the authority to rewrite the Bloodline registry, formalize the erasure, and close off any legal avenue to challenge the original coalition's actions. After that, even if the truth comes out, there is no mechanism to act on it. He placed the vote records on the table. But the assembly has one provision the original coalition never anticipated needing to use. If the Blood Throne is present and it makes a recognition, all other claims are void. No vote, no council consensus, no prior decision overrides it. I looked at Cody. The Blood Throne has been in this palace for 20 years. I've been keeping it safe. I've been waiting for the person it would recognize. He held my gaze. The assembly is in 11 days. I think you know what I'm going to ask you. I was quiet for a moment. Then. Tell me what happens at the assembly. Every detail. Chapter 9, The Fall of the Alpha. In the days between the conspiracy meeting and the Grand Lunar Assembly, 2 things happened that I had not planned for. The first, Bonnie Finn arrived at Cody's palace. She came alone. No escort, no announcement. She left the Blackthorn Pack territory quietly, and by the time anyone noticed she was gone, she was already at the mountain gates. Marisol brought her to me, and we sat in the same room where I had first learned my name, and Bonnie looked at her hands and told me everything she knew. She had not been told about me specifically. She had been told she was being chosen as Luna because her bloodline was politically useful. She had accepted because she had been trained her entire life to believe that usefulness was the highest good a woman of her family could achieve. But she had done her own reading since the festival. She was sharper than she had been given credit for. He used you for 7 years and then he used me for the announcement. Neither of us was ever the point. The point was always the assembly. She set a sealed document on the table between us. His father's correspondence. He kept copies in a secondary location. Ryan doesn't know I found them. They outline the original cover-up in his grandfather's own handwriting. I think you need this more than I do. I looked at the document. Then I looked at her. Why? She met my eyes steadily. Because I watched what they did to you and then I watched them plan to do it to every person who comes after. Someone needs to stop it. I can't do that. But you can. The second thing that happened, Cody came to find me late at night, 3 days before the assembly. I was sitting with the portraits again. I had developed a habit of spending time in that room, working through the history that Eloy had given me, trying to build a relationship with the people I was descended from, trying to understand what I was being asked to carry. Cody sat beside me without speaking for a while, which I had come to understand was his way of offering company without pressure. His presence was not the demanding kind. It occupied space quietly and left the rest to you. Eventually I said, "The night you appeared on the road. You said something before I turned around. You said she is finally awake. What did you mean?" He was quiet for a moment. "Your mother gave me a message before she died. She knew she wasn't going to reach you. She asked me to keep searching. She said, when the bloodline wakes, be there. She is going to need someone who chose her before she was powerful." I turned to look at him. "You spent 6 years looking for me. I told your mother I would. I keep my word. There was something in the way he said it, not performance, not the language of strategy, that landed in the center of me differently than everything else had. I had spent 7 years in a pack where loyalty was currency and love was conditional on usefulness. This was different. This was the simple statement of a man who had given his word to a dying woman and then actually kept it, for 6 years, in quiet, without anyone watching. I did not say anything romantic or dramatic. I just said, "Thank you." And he nodded, just slightly, as if that were enough. Because it was. We sat with the portraits until the fire burned low, and at some point the space between us on the bench became something other than just the absence of distance, and neither of us moved away. 3 days. Then the assembly. Chapter 10, The Kingdom Kneels. The Grand Lunar Assembly convened in the Hall of the Deep Moon. It was the largest ceremonial space in the Lycan world, built into a mountain cavern so vast that the ceiling disappeared into shadow, the acoustics carrying every sound to every corner without amplification. The floor was white stone. The seating rose in tiers on all sides. Every alpha, every elder, every council representative and royal bloodline delegate was present. Thousands of wolves. Every significant name in the entire kingdom structure. At the far end of the hall stood the elevated platform. On the platform, covered in black ceremonial cloth, waited the blood throne. I arrived with Cody, Marisol, Eloy, Josephine, Vance, and Ursula. We did not announce ourselves. We entered through the side passage that the council had not thought to seal because they had never anticipated needing to. Ryan was already on the floor, surrounded by his delegation, dressed in the full ceremonial black of an alpha presenting for supreme leadership. He was speaking to several elders, and he was excellent at it. Warm without being soft, authoritative without being aggressive, every inch of him performing the role he had been building toward since the day he found his father's archives. He looked confident. He looked, I thought, exactly like a man who believed he had already won. He had not seen me yet. The assembly opened with the traditional address from the elder council head, an ancient man named Lassiter whose white hair and stern expression gave the impression of a man who had been keeping unpleasant order for so long he had forgotten what any other kind felt like. His voice was steady, his procedure impeccable, the opening formalities unfolded exactly as they always had. Ryan stepped forward for his formal presentation. That was when I walked into the center of the floor. The hall did not immediately go quiet. Thousands of people registered the interruption in stages, the way a crowd always does, first the nearest rows, then a wave backward as heads turned to track the focus of other heads, until the silence had propagated to every tier and the entire space was watching. Ryan's eyes found me. And I watched his confidence, the particular texture of a certainty that has had years to solidify, develop its first crack. "This is not your place, Kathryn. You were dismissed from the Blackthorn Pack. You have no standing in this assembly." I did not respond to him. I walked to the platform. Lassiter raised a hand. "Halt. This is a secured assembly floor. Identify your standing or be removed." Ursula stepped forward behind me, her silver robes and the glowing lunar markings on her skin commanding the attention of every elder in the room. She stands under the right of bloodline recognition. Moon Priestess certification, performed 3 days ago in the presence of 2 elder witnesses. Moonfall dynasty primary lineage, unbroken, confirmed. The hall erupted. Every voice at once, dozens of languages and dialects, shock and denial and recognition and confusion all moving simultaneously through the space like weather. Ryan's voice rose above it. The Moonfall dynasty is extinct. Those records were verified decades ago. This is fabrication. She was rejected on bloodline grounds at a formal pack ceremony, she carries no. I reached the blood throne. I lifted the ceremonial cloth. The throne was smaller than its reputation. Dark stone, veined with silver, carved with the same runic script as the statues on the forest road and the floor of the ritual chamber. It sat with the dense presence of something that has existed for a very long time and is entirely accustomed to its own weight. I turned to face the assembly. I held Bonnie's document, Ryan's father's correspondence, the original coalition outlined in his grandfather's hand. And I held Eloy's recovered records, and I held the Moon Priestess certification, and I said, "My name is Kathryn Hendry. And 23 years ago, 7 ruling families, including the Hazelton family, dismantled a dynasty that had governed this kingdom for 6 centuries, erased its records, and hid its heir. I have the documents. I have the bloodline verification. And I have a simple question for this assembly. Would you like to see what the blood throne decides?" The hall was very still. I turned to the throne and I sat down. The recognition was immediate. Not gradual, not in stages, the runes ignited all at once, every one simultaneously, the silver-gold light flooding the throne and expanding outward across the floor in rings, moving across the white stone toward the edges of the hall, reaching the tiers, reaching the walls, filling the space from floor to ceiling. The 7 wolf statues that had stood as ceremonial decorations at the back of the hall. Statues that had stood unlit for 23 years, began to glow. One by one they lowered their carved heads. The entire hall went to their knees. Not by instruction, not by command, but by the same reflex that had driven every ancient wolf to lower itself before me in every forest and corridor since the suppression broke. An old recognition built into the bones of the world. Bloodline speaks to bloodline across centuries. Ryan did not kneel immediately. He stood for a moment, surrounded by a hall that had bent its knees and a light that made every corner mercilessly bright, and he looked at the throne, and at me on it, and at the documents in my hands, and at the face he had kept close for 7 years while believing he was managing the situation. I did not look at him with anger. I had moved past the part of this that was about anger. I looked at him the way you look at a consequence. Calm. Clear. Final. His knees bent. Lassiter, who had lived long enough to recognize a thing that was larger than procedure, spoke into the silence. The blood throne has made its recognition. All current leadership claims are paused pending full review of the presented evidence. This assembly will reconvene in 3 days under the authority of the verified bloodline heir. He looked at me. And then the oldest elder in the room, a man who had kept unpleasant order for decades, bowed his head. The 3 days that followed were the most consequential in a generation. The documents were verified by independent scholars. The original coalition was named publicly. 5 of the 7 families confessed in writing when they understood the evidence left them no alternative. The Hazelton family documents were entered into the public record. Ryan was stripped of his Alpha title pending full investigation. The 7 families were removed from their council positions. The Bloodline Registry was opened for independent review for the first time in 23 years. Bonnie Finn was formally absolved. It was recorded that she had no knowledge of the conspiracy and had actively assisted in its exposure. She returned to her own family's territory and did not look back. I did not attend the public proceedings on the second day. I walked instead to the gardens at the top of the mountain palace, where the wind came in clean from the high ridges and the sky was enormous overhead, and I stood in it and tried to absorb what had happened. Cody found me there. He stood beside me without asking permission, which by now felt natural. For a while neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You know what happens next isn't simple. Rebuilding what was taken apart doesn't go fast. There will be resistance. Families who cooperated for decades don't relinquish that quietly. It's going to take years. I know. And you're going to need people around you who aren't there because it's useful. People who are there because they chose it." I turned to look at him. "Is that a formal declaration, Cody Walker?" And for the first time since the forest road, his expression shifted fully, the controlled stillness breaking into something much warmer, much more human. It's a fact. I chose this a long time ago. But yes. Consider it formal. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who had kept a promise to my dying mother for 6 years, who had built an entire life around a search he had no guarantee would end, who had stood in a doorway and given me space to find my own footing before he ever asked for anything in return. I said. Then stay. I would like that very much. He nodded once. And in the garden at the top of the mountain, with the wind moving between us and the kingdom rearranging itself below, he took my hand. Not dramatically. Not as a declaration for anyone else. Just hold it, steadily, the way a person holds something they have decided to keep. And I let him. There is one last thing I need to tell you. 3 weeks after the assembly, when the initial proceedings were concluded and the public record had been amended and the first formal session of the restored council was scheduled, I went back to the border forest. I walked the old road alone, in the early morning, the light still gray and soft. The stone wolves were standing as they always had, worn smooth by rain, their carvings faded. But their eyes held the residue of that silver-gold light, a faint glow that did not extinguish anymore, as if they had finally found a reason to stay awake. I stopped at the center of the road. I stood there for a while. And I thought about the girl who had walked this road 3 weeks ago, carrying nothing but a travel bag and a grief she hadn't let herself feel yet, and the stone wolves waking up around her, and a voice from the trees saying something she hadn't understood yet. She is finally awake. I thought, yes. She is. And it cost something. And it was worth it. And she is not finished yet. The wolf's eyes glowed steadily. The road ahead was long and it was mine. I walked it. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. What this story teaches us. Every great story carries truth inside its drama. Here are the truths woven into Kathryn's journey. 1. Your worth is not determined by who rejects you. Ryan did not reject Kathryn because she was powerless. He rejected her because he feared what she carried. The people who dismiss you most loudly are often the ones who sense your potential most clearly, and feel most threatened by it. Rejection is not judgment. It is often fear, wear a formal coat. 2. Loyalty given freely is not the same as loyalty that has been earned. Kathryn spent 7 years proving herself to a man who had already decided what role she would play. She believed that hard work and dedication would move a heart that had made up its mind. Real loyalty flows in both directions, and if you are always the one giving it without receiving it in return, that is not love, it is service. 3. The people who choose you before you are powerful are the ones worth keeping. Cody Walker spent 6 years looking for Kathryn without knowing what she would become. He honored a promise. He asked for nothing. The people who show up consistently, quietly, and without requiring you to perform your worth, those are the people who actually see you. Not your title. Not your usefulness. You. 4. Truth cannot stay buried forever. The coalition spent 23 years suppressing Kathryn's identity. They rewrote records, erased history, built entire power structures on the foundation of what they had destroyed. And all of it unraveled the moment the suppression broke. What is true does not stop being true because it has been covered over. It waits. And it has extraordinary patience. 5. The things that were done to you do not define your destination. Kathryn was hidden, erased, kept from her own history, used, dismissed, and publicly humiliated. None of those things changed what she was. They delayed it. The circumstances of your beginning, the cruelties of your middle, the systems that worked against you, these are not the final chapter. They are the pressure that shapes what comes next. 6. Power used for exposure and restoration is greater than power used for revenge. Kathryn did not use the blood throne to punish. She used it to tell the truth. The exposure of the conspiracy, the public naming of what was done, that was not cruelty. It was accurate. And in the end, justice that is precise is far more powerful than destruction that is angry. 7. You are not powerless. You may simply be hidden. Perhaps the deepest truth in this story, Kathryn never changed. The person she was at 16, determined, precise, loyal, capable, was the same person who sat on the blood throne. She was not made into something. She was revealed. If you feel unseen, unvalued, dismissed, or forgotten, consider that it may not be that you are insufficient. It may be that the right circumstances have not yet arrived to show what you have always carried. 8. The people who help you carry the truth deserve to be remembered. Eloy, Marisol, Josephine, Vance, Ursula, Bonnie, each of them contributed something essential. None of them was the main character. But without them, the truth would not have reached the light. Every person who chooses honesty at personal cost deserves acknowledgement. The great moments are built on the quiet courage of many. Thank you for watching till the end. Subscribe, like, share, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know if you enjoyed the story.